In 1942, an American magazine put his face on its cover and called him the finest mind in the German army. 7 years later, that same man was in the dock, on trial for war crimes. How does a soldier, some rated the military genius of his generation, end up bound to the machinery of a war of extermination? This is the story of Erich von Manstein, and of the myth that still clings to his name. He was born in Berlin on the 24th of November, 1887, and christened Fritz Erich Georg Eduard von Lewinsky. Start with that one word, von. In Germany, it marks you as nobility, and the Lewinskys and the Mansteins were nobility of a very particular kind, the Prussian officer class, the families that filled the army's command. 16 of his direct ancestors had worn an officer's uniform, Prussian or Russian. In this family, the army wasn't a career choice, it was the air you breathed. He wouldn't even keep his birth name. His Aunt Hedwig and her husband, Major George von Manstein, were childless, so by arrangement the newborn was handed over and adopted, and Erich von Lewinsky became Erich von Manstein. The connections ran straight to the top. Another aunt, Gertrude, was married to Paul von Hindenburg, the future field marshal and head of state. He was raised on the creed of the Prussian officer: obedience, discipline, duty, comradeship. After a few years at a grammar school in Strasbourg, then a German city, he entered the cadet school at Plön Castle in 1900. Picture a real ducal castle turned military academy, the same school where Kaiser Wilhelm's own sons were being educated. From there, he moved to the main Prussian cadet academy at Lichterfelde, just outside Berlin, and in 1905 he even served as a page at the imperial court. But here's the thing worth getting right. Manstein did not grow up the master of some grand estate. The castles in his story are schools, the institutions that stamped out an entire generation of Prussian officers. He was commissioned into the Foot Guards in 1906, made lieutenant a year later, and by 1913 he had reached the War Academy, the road to the general staff. That training never finished. When war broke out in 1914, the academy emptied straight to the front. Manstein fought first in Belgium, then in the east, at the Masurian Lakes on the Vistula. In November 1914, a close-quarters firefight left him badly wounded, and he spent months recovering in hospital. When he came back, they pulled him into staff work anyway, training finished or not, and over the next 4 years, he helped plan operations across 3 theaters: the East, Serbia, and the Western Front, where the Somme was grinding men into the mud. He had a feel for tactics, and it showed. He left the war with the Iron Cross, both classes, and a reputation as a staff officer who thought big. After 1918, he stayed on in an army cut to the bone. Versailles had capped it at 100,000 men. Like most of his fellow officers, he had no love for the Weimar Republic. He stayed conservative, monarchist, out of step with the times. In 1929, he joined the Troop Office, the general staff in all but name, a body Versailles had actually banned, and built a reputation as a planner. When the Nazis took power in 1933, Manstein, like a great many officers, was glad to see the Republic go. By 1935, he was running the operations branch of the Army General Staff. By 1936, deputy to its chief. And here a detail needs handling with care. In 1934, Manstein wrote a memo protesting the Nazi Aryan paragraph being forced on the army, and you'll sometimes see that held up as proof he stood apart from anti-Semitism. It doesn't hold up. His argument was about the army policing its own ranks, and in the same breath, he stated flatly that the whole army accepted the racial idea. This was a turf war over military autonomy, not a stand against Nazi racial policy. In 1938, he was pushed out to a division command in Silesia. In 1939, he rode into Poland as Chief of Staff of Army Group South. It's France that made his name. In the autumn of 1939, the Army High Command drew up a plan that looked an awful lot like the one that had failed in 1914, a big right hook through Flanders. Manstein looked at it and saw a slow, grinding stalemate, the one thing Germany couldn't afford. His counter-idea was audacious. Send the armor through the Ardennes, the hill country the French had written off as no place for tanks. Punch through there, and you could trap the main Allied armies up north. Now, the credit. Manstein supplied the killer idea, but not the finished plan. The detail was the High Command's work, and turning the concept into a real armored breakthrough owed a great deal to Heinz Guderian and Gerd von Rundstedt. The tidy label, the Manstein Plan, papers over a team effort. His lobbying got him sidelined. The chief of staff, Halder, kicked him upstairs to a corps command in Stettin to get him out of the way. But the idea reached Hitler through the back door, and in February 1940, Hitler made it the basis of the whole offensive. The irony? When the attack came, Manstein had a bit part. His moment came only in the second phase, driving his corps 400 kilometers to the Loire. June 1940 made him a full general. July brought the Knight's Cross. February 1941 put him in charge of a motorized corps. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union that June, he tore 240 kilometers into Soviet territory in 5 days. By September, he had the 11th Army and the job of taking the Crimea. By November, Simferopol, Feodosia, and Kerch had fallen, and the great fortress of Sevastopol was under siege. And this is where any version of Manstein as nothing but a brilliant general falls apart. On the 20th of November, 1941, Manstein, the army commander, issued an order modeled on the infamous Reichenau Order. In it, he called for the Jewish-Bolshevik system to be wiped out for good, and he primed his men for the murder of the Jews. While he held that command, the SS Einsatzgruppe D shot at least 33,000 Jews in his area of operations, the Simferopol massacre of December 1941 among them. After the war, he swore he had known nothing about the killings. Historians find that claim impossible to believe. Militarily, the summer of 1942 was his peak. In May, he wiped out the Soviet forces on the Kerch Peninsula. In July, he cracked the fortress of Sevastopol. On the 1st of July 1942, Hitler made him a field marshal, General Feldmarschall, at 54. That is the summit this whole story has been climbing toward, the very top of the military ladder. Instead of the planned assault on Leningrad, November 1942 dropped him into the disaster at Stalingrad as commander of the new Army Group Don, the 6th Army trapped inside the city. His relief drive, Operation Winter Storm, ground to a halt some 48 kilometers short of the pocket. Hitler forbade a breakout, and the 6th Army was doomed. Manstein's part in this is still argued over. In his memoirs, he's the voice pushing for a breakout, but several historians note that as early as the 24th of November, he was advising against it, banking on promised air supply, and they read his later account as a cleaned-up version. Then came his finest hour as a commander. In March 1943, he counterattacked, retook Kharkov and Belgorod, and pulled the collapsing southern front back together. That summer, at Kursk, the Wehrmacht threw its last great eastern offensive, Operation Citadel. Manstein wanted to strike early. Hitler held back, waiting on new tanks. The delay handed the Red Army the time it needed to dig in deep, and the offensive broke against those defenses. His relationship with Hitler was coming apart. In the spring of 1944, he forced the dictator's hand and got the encircled 1st Panzer Army out, around 200,000 men, in an operation still taught in staff colleges. It was the last big thing he would do. He kept his distance from the men plotting against Hitler. More than once, he turned the conspirators down. That famous line, "Prussian field marshals do not mutiny," comes with a warning label. Historians doubt it, and it surfaced only in 1977, years after he was dead. On the 30th of March 1944, Hitler sacked him from Army Group South and shelved him in the reserve. He never held a command again. In August 1945, the British took him prisoner. In captivity, Manstein and a circle of fellow officers drafted a memorandum that scrubbed the Army's record clean, the seed of one of the most durable myths of the war, the clean Wehrmacht, an army that supposedly fought a decent fight while the SS and the SD did the dirty work. The history doesn't support the split. In 1949, The British put him on trial in Hamburg, the last Allied war crimes trial there would be. Even in Britain, the case had its critics. Winston Churchill chipped into his defense fund personally. On the 19th of December 1949, the court convicted him on 9 of 17 counts for tolerating shootings, for handing commissars to the SD, for failing the civilians under his authority. 18 years. The sentence didn't last. It was cut to 12. His time since 1945 was counted, and in 1953, with a push from Churchill and a hand from Adenauer, he walked free. A formal rehabilitation, though, the British were careful never to grant. In West Germany, a second act opened. Until 1960, Manstein, the only surviving field marshal, quietly advised the new government as it built the Bundeswehr. His memoir, Lost Victories, came out in 1955. Another book followed in 1958. Both sold and sold. In them, he pins the collapse on Hitler and lets the generals off the hook. Historians put it bluntly. In Lost Victories, he wrote himself victories that never happened. Lost, so the story goes, only because Hitler kept meddling. The title tells you everything. It's a self-portrait, not a record. Erich von Manstein died on the 10th of June, 1973, and was buried with full military honors. The head of the Bundeswehr gave the eulogy. Even the obituaries couldn't agree with themselves, praising the soldier, noting the silence of the man who never broke with the regime. One paper called the reborn Manstein myth exactly the wrong message to send a young democracy's new army. So how do we weigh him? The talent is real and beyond dispute. The Sickle Cut, Sevastopol, the breakout on the Dnieper. But that talent served a war of extermination, whose crimes happened on his watch and which his own orders helped along. The legend of the apolitical, clean-handed soldier has been taken apart, piece by the historians. To see Manstein clearly, you have to hold the two halves together, the brilliance and the complicity. Neither one erases the other.